Movie Reviews. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, the 28th film in the MCU, which is crazy. We used to get like one, maybe two films a year. Last year we got 4. This will be a spoiler-free review, so don't worry if you haven't seen it. I'm not going to talk a lot in depth about the spoilers because even if I wanted to, I don't know enough about Marvel to tell you things about it. This is very much coming from the perspective of a movie lover, so I'm going to be talking about the movie elements, what worked, what didn't work for me. I really hope I don't get canceled for this, but more than ever, I fully buy into what Martin Scorsese said about the MCU, that these really aren't movies, they're more of just theme park rides. Let me explain, because on the surface level, sure, that sounds a little offensive, and people are still up in arms about him, even though he said that quote like 3 years ago. But we have reached the point where these movies don't stand on their own anymore, meaning you can't just go in and see this movie without seeing every other Marvel movie. That statement to a certain extent has been true for franchises before, like you can't just see the third movie in a franchise without seeing the first two. But with the MCU, it's different, because it's not just the first Doctor Strange you have to watch all the Avenger movies, you have to watch now Disney Plus shows, and that's been a meme this entire weekend of people on Twitter saying in order to see Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness you have to see this, and this, and most of them are just a bunch of jokes of things that aren't actually relevant. However, in this case the joke is actually real because there is so many things you need to see in order to understand everything that's happening in this movie, and it's not even all MCU related. I'm not going to get into what those things are, but there are things that I haven't even seen or I'm aware of and had to go look up after the fact to say, okay, what exactly was this? There's even one specific spoiler that when it happens, you need to be aware of internet culture and where the MCU fandom has taken it, because this reference only makes sense if you have been keeping up with what the fans have been saying for years now, and they finally deliver on this said thing. And again, that's probably not making a whole lot of sense, but I literally had to turn to my wife in the movie and explain, okay, so this is why this is clever. It's because the internet said this, and then eventually to this, blah, 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 and then this happened. So it's just a little exhausting, if I'm being honest, and like, that's probably coming across as really negative, and I promise it's not. You just kind of have to decide, do you enjoy that or do you not? Because when I've been talking to people this weekend, a lot of people love that part of the MCU. They love that this movie pretty much just exists to introduce new things and concepts. I just personally think I'm at the point where I would also prefer a really well done movie that I could just watch on its own. I just think there's a very stark difference between old MCU movies and what we're getting now, because old MCU movies would very much focus on the character development. There'd be a very clear arc, a lesson, a moral, something that we as the audience can take and learn from. But it feels, and especially in this movie, it's less about the character development, but more of the universe development. And they definitely try with the character development, but it's more done in the way where they say like one line up front of a flaw the main protagonist has, and then it's very obviously overcome in one of the final scenes, and that counts as character development. Basically what I'm saying is Doctor Strange, who's supposed to be the main protagonist of this film, doesn't actually get a full arc in this movie. He's more the character we're supposed to follow along as we are introduced to this larger universe, and the universe is developed and pretty much just there to guide us to the next stage of the MCU. And will that work for some people? Absolutely. Clearly it does, because people love the MCU despite that fact. I will say though, with all the universe building that this movie does, I was a little disappointed, and maybe my expectations were just slightly tilted a different way, because there was a lot of, cameos, there's a lot of cool things, a lot of introductions of like, oh cool, this is what's going to happen next. But the actual multiverse itself, I think, was pretty underdeveloped. Basically, we are sent to one specific multiverse that most of this movie takes place in, and we get glimpses of other things, but there's not really a whole lot more explored. And I think a big problem with that is because we've been so exposed to the multiverse already at this point. I know not everyone has seen Everything Everywhere All at Once, but if you have, I would be very surprised if you thought that this version of the multiverse was more developed than that one. Even movies like Into the Spider-Verse, I thought, did a much better job of kind of explaining and showing different sides to it. This was very much a baseline introduction of what the multiverse could be, and I really hope that if they continue to go down this route, that it's further explored later on. The things I did love about this movie is that Sam Raimi's hands are all over it. I was honestly a little surprised at how many references there are to other films that he has directed in the past, but the whole movie is filled with visuals and other fun props, and the horror elements are super creative. Now, I will say they definitely did keep him on a leash, and you can feel the tension between what I think he wanted to go for and what Marvel actually let him do. If you were going in thinking that this is going to be the Marvel version of a horror movie, well, you're kind of right, because it's not a horror movie at all, and it's definitely Marvel's version of what they think a horror movie could be. There are spooky elements and sure a lot of blood and probably like more graphic deaths than we've ever seen in an MCU movie, but for the most part, it's a very tame PG-13 version version of what Sam Raimi likes to do best. And so I'm definitely glad that they're giving a lot of creative liberties to these unique directors. However, they still are a well-oiled machine and they need to fit within their system. And so I think for the sake of the MCU, that tension between letting Sam Raimi do what he wants and still doing what you need to do as a universe, it has to exist for them. And so if you're just looking for a good old classic Sam Raimi film, this one probably isn't it. But if you like Sam Raimi and you also enjoy watching MCU movies, yeah, you're going to like this one. But overall, I thought this movie was fine. It was fun. It didn't really do a whole lot to push the needle for me. I'd probably put it in the mid to lower tier of MCU movies. But if you're not burnt out on the MCU yet, this movie is definitely going to introduce a lot of cool things that are going to come later on. Those are my thoughts on Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness. Did it work for you? What did you think? Have you seen the movie? Comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you next time.